Welcome to night number 135 of History Bedtime Stories in our pajamas in bed. And tonight's episode is actually a question we've been emailed by a student. Her email says, "Hi, my name's Emily and I'm in 7th grade. Our summer project was to find a famous Michigander who shares our first name. Do you know of any famous Emilys?" I do, Emily. I actually have a very, very favorite Michigan Emily from history. Her name was Emily Butterfield, and I hope you're gonna love her too, because Emily Butterfield was the first woman to be licensed as an architect in the entire state of Michigan. She's born right here in Michigan in Algonac, which is part of St. Clair County. And she ends up coming to Detroit. Her family moves into the city so she can attend Detroit public schools. By 1903, Emily Butterfield has been accepted into Syracuse University's architecture program. And off to New York she goes. She studies there for 4 years and in 1907 is awarded her degree in architecture. Now, her father is also an artist and an architect, and together they had spent a lot of her childhood and teenage years on sketching and watercolor trips through the western part of the United States and through Europe. The family was well enough off to afford these trips and well enough off to send their daughter to Syracuse University. So when she comes back to Detroit, her and her dad are sort of working together, but she's trying to make a name for herself. Give it 10 years, and by 1917, father and daughter found Butterfield and Butterfield, which is an architecture firm. And their specialty, like what they're really, really good at, is churches. They together design and build dozens of churches during their careers here in Michigan. But what they're really known for are Methodist churches. And they started pulling the church movement of architecture away from just a building that you go to worship on Sunday and into a community space that can be enjoyed throughout the entire week. She also builds factories, summer camps, schools, homes, and Butterfield become fairly well known. During this time, though, Emily Butterfield realizes everyone she deals with in a normal day, everyone she comes in contact with, from the guy who sells her the bricks, to the builders, to the masons, to the plasterers, they're all men. And Emily's thinking to herself, we really need an organization to help support women who want to have jobs outside of the home. So she becomes one of the 3 co-founders of the Detroit Business Women's Club, which was the first female-led business organization in the entire country. Her other 2 co-founders are super cool, and in case you have friends named Grace or Emma, this is Emma Spohr, who was a publisher, and Grace Wright, who was really an agent for manufacturing, and that's how her and Emily Butterfield knew each other. And then bringing Emma Spohr in, they become the 3 women who sort of build this community of women in business. Emma and Grace both take turns as presidents, but the founding president of the Detroit Business Women's Club, it's Emily Butterfield. And she later says in an interview in the 1920s, "I think it never occurred to us that we were doing something absolutely unique. I know I never would have had any idea if it had not been that all of my business acquaintances were men. And I was actually lonesome for speaking acquaintances with business women as I patterned up and down the avenue at noon hour looking for a place where a lone woman might eat a meal." So even back at the teens and 20s, she's thinking, I just want to have lunch. I don't want to be bothered. I don't want to be flirted with. I want to have this time to really concentrate on my career. And by finding these like-minded women and forming the Detroit Women's Business Club, she really gave herself a community. She also finds community in Greek life. She was an early supporter of sororities and fraternities and belonged to one at Syracuse University. Because both her and her father had this real interest, this hobby, this strange obsession with coats of arms and crests of European royal families, they start finding work both illustrating and coloring the fraternity coats of arms and sorority coats of arms. In fact, she designs coats of arms for over 70 fraternities and over 100 sororities. So if you were a sorority brother or sister, a fraternity brother and sister, your coat of arms may very well have come from Emily Butterfield. She goes on to be pretty darn successful as an illustrator as well, and to further education in architecture, especially for girls, she writes a children's book. It's called Young People's History of Architecture, and it's published in 1933, and it goes through 4 full publishings, which means it's sold out enough that the press had to reprint 4 separate times. She did all of her own illustrations, and she really drew from her travels across the Western United States and Europe. And in her book, she talks about the love of architecture, place and space. When her career starts slowing down and she decides to retire, she leaves Detroit and Pontiac, moving to Nabish Island here in Michigan. It's there that during World War II, she serves as the postmaster for the island. She passes away on March 22nd, 1958. But her legacy remains in all of the buildings she designed, as well as being inducted into the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame in the field of architecture in 1990. Emily, I hope that helps. Wash your hands, and we'll see you tomorrow night.